Well, while the Liberals boycotted today's Job Summit and spent the day in Lismore talking to locals about what more they need in flood recovery, their coalition partner, the Nationals, did send in a sole representative, their leader, David Littleproud. He must have felt rather alone in the Great Hall. Let's find out right now. David, welcome. Was it a bit lonely in there for you?
It was a tad, Chris. There was plenty of union representation, but I think the CFMEU contribution was a window into what the union movement expects out of this government. I mean, the vitriol that came out of his mouth and the words of "it's now time," "it's our time," is a window into the expectation of the union movement out of the government. They want their debt repaid that they've got the Albanese government in. They're high up in the stirrups, and I just fear that some of our business groups are sleepwalking into some negotiations and into agreements that will be retrograde for our economy and ultimately for employment in this country. So the Nationals took the pragmatic step that we were an afterthought. Regional Australia was an afterthought, and we thought it important that Regional Australia have that voice. We very rarely get it. The fact we weren't invited, we're 30% of the population, and weren't invited to the Job Summit, I think is a reflection on this government. But we were going to make sure, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to speak tomorrow about some of those challenges that we're facing. But I think another window into what I saw today was, in fact, one of the sessions on trying to get women into work. They excluded 30% of women in this country when not one regional woman was put on that panel to talk about the unique challenges that regional and remote women face in getting back into the workforce or getting into workforce. Things like affordable childcare is one thing, but the availability of childcare is the first and foremost problem in many of areas. So not even to have a regional woman, though rightfully had someone there representing the Indigenous communities, but when 30% of women in this country weren't given a voice at this summit today, is a reflection on this government and what they think about us. We're the forgotten Australians, and the Nationals are going to be pragmatic. We're going to hold this mob to account, but we're going to take every opportunity to use it as a platform to make sure regional Australians aren't forgotten under this new government.
I'm glad you raised that. It is disgraceful because most of those people in that Great Hall only see things through the prism of an inner city environment. And I'm glad you realise that the people that you represent need to be represented in any kind of summit, whether it's jobs, immigration or whatever. But going back on the CFMEU, I made the point at the beginning of the program, what world are these people living in? How entitled are these dirtbags, especially from the CFMEU? Have they looked at what the state of the economy is right now and what debt we face? Why would it ever be their time, especially now?
Well, this is payback, and they helped Anthony Albanese get to office. They paid the bill. They paid those millions of dollars to make sure they could advertise. In fact, $10 million is the number the CFMEU has given the Labor Party. Thankfully, some of the state premiers are now handing back some of the money from the CFMEU because of the actions that they've taken, their members have taken, that are not up to standard. And it's a wonder that Anthony Albanese hasn't handed that money back. But, to see so many unions there represented when they're represent less than 10% of the workforce, but they represented 25% of those that turned up today, it just goes to show that there's a debt to be paid. Anthony Albanese is going to have to pay it. And we need to understand that the unions aren't always the workers' friends because there's unintended consequences from what they try to put in place. It means that there's less employment because it costs business more. There has to be a balance, and I've been a member of a union before when I was in the workplace. There's a place for them, but there has to be balance, and unfortunately I think the balance is about to get out askew with this new government because the debt has to be repaid to the union movement.
Which is why they had 35 representatives today and they should have had 14 if they're only representing 10% of the population and you've got 142 chairs. Now, apart from free TAFE places, which David could have been delivered and announced 4 months ago when he first came in, was it any more than 100-odd people having 100-odd ideas?
Well, yeah, plenty of great ideas, but now the rubber has to hit the road. And look, we don't begrudge the fact that the federal government stepped in on TAFE places, but just understand this is because of failure of state governments. TAFE has always been the responsibility of state governments.
Yes.
And the fact that the federal government has to intervene into this is a reflection on state governments. And I think we need to have a conversation about federation and getting back into our key lines of responsibility and don't deviate. There's this thing called GST that's carved up and states are meant to prioritise how they spend that, and TAFE is one. But even the boot test, let me just say that the changes that are being mooted by Tony Burke on the boot test are effectively what we put to Parliament, put to the Labor Party before the election. And they've simply said no at that point because they wanted to have a political fight rather than have an outcome. Now, we're going to be pragmatic. We'll see if they bring exactly what we put up, and we'll work through that boot test. But I just hope that and fear that there's some business peak bodies that are sleepwalking into something that I think might go further than just the boot test. And I just fear that businesses might be left in the dark on this and then foot the bill. And then we see that the only way they'll foot the bill is actually have to reduce the numbers they employ. So we have to get the balance right. And that's where a government that is balanced in dealing with unions and also with businesses gets the balance right in making sure that those settings are correct for the economy moving forward. And that means not every child gets a prize every time.
Yeah. David Littleproud, good luck tomorrow and give it to them. Thank you very much for your time.